My God, how rich it is to be steeped in the story of the Exodus in these days. The content is always rich, I should say, and the story is always relevant. But with so many in here in this country and around the world who are needing and seeking deliverance, the liberation story of the Exodus could never be more present to us than it is today. As usual, I'm not going to assume anything about your biblical knowledge and background. And plus, everybody could always use a refresher. So I want us to take just a moment to situate ourselves in this particular moment of the beginning of the Exodus story. And first, the broader picture. The children of Israel, refugees in the land of Egypt, thanks to familial ties we learn about in Joseph's story, initially had received welcome and respite in Egypt. But as they settled into Egypt and the Pharaoh who was friendly to them then died, their refugee status started to draw the next administration's ire, to the point that this administration exacted the cruelest form of family separation, which, by the way, family separation is always cruel. But this administration enacted the most cruel family separation policy possible, which is the murder of babies, the baby boys. And as you heard last week, the midwives, led by Shiphrah and Puah, resisted. And one such baby boy, get this, because the story is connected, one of those baby boys that was saved in this bold and courageous uprising was a young man who Pharaoh's daughter would later name Moses. Moses, or the Hebrew Moshe, which translates the one who draws out, who himself had been drawn out of the water. Now, the Exodus doesn't tell us what it was like for Moses to be raised an orphan in Pharaoh's vast household, but we do know that he was other. Even the Midianites would mistake him for an Egyptian, so he walked around with a sense of privilege. But he also knew that the ruling class he was raised amongst was not his people. And I'm guessing that Pharaoh's household made that clear to Moses throughout his lifetime. It was probably like what we witness even to this day here, where a white privileged family will take in Black children from another country, Black or brown children from another country, and see them. And I'd like to quote our fellow worshiper, who probably is with us right now, Dr. Regine Michel Jean Charles, who is herself from Haiti, as she said, the children would not be seen as their equals or potential laden equals, but merely as the sum of their trauma. And there was an othering happening in that seat of power in Pharaoh's house. And I believe we can see in the story that Moses knew it intimately, which was clear as he began to seek out his people. Out of the palace, Moses went, and into the street. Out of the palace and into the streets. It wasn't long before Moses encountered the regime's brutality towards his people. And you see, there was something really special about this Moses. He wasn't the kind who would see something wrong and turn away from it, which is why when Moses saw an oppressor, brutalizing one of his kinfolk, he took action, radical action. And just to be clear, I'm not suggesting that you take this form of action. I'm just going to tell you what happened with Moses. So when he saw the brutality, when he saw somebody beating up, destroying one of his kinfolk, Moses stopped it by killing the bully. And he buried him in the sand. And from that point on, I want you to understand this, Moses became a fugitive of the law. Moses was a fugitive of the law. Pharaoh learned of Moses' deed, exacted his judgment, and from then on, Pharaoh hunted Moses with the full power and authority of the state. Moses was an immigrant with a record, a felon. And under our current policies here in the US, if Moses even survived his trial, he surely would have been deported. But Moses fled, and he made his way to a quieter place in Midian, which is in what we would call Saudi Arabia. And in Midian, he could be far away from the surveilling state that somehow saw what he had done, that murder, when he was sure no one was around. We have no idea how they knew. But over in Midian, he was able to marry a Midianite, Zipporah, someone not from his own tribe, but not Egyptian either, and started keeping her father's sheep with her. And it's in this particular context that we meet the Moses we learn about today in today's story, which is so important because let me recap and let those with ears to hear listen. Moses was a refugee, then an immigrant, adoptee, raised at the seatbed of power, and then a killer, and then a fugitive. This is the person whom God chose to address at Horeb or Sinai on God's mountain, speaking as a flame in a bush that would burn but not be consumed. Moses was minding his business, which in his case was Daddy Jethro's flock. And for some reason, they went through a patch of desert together to end up at God's mountain, where God interrupted Moses' shepherding role to essentially bestow him with a greater flock, to place him right back in Pharaoh's own courts, to bring him right back to the place that would love to put him in shackles, incarcerate, enslave, and eventually execute him. That's the danger that Moses knew could be ahead of him. And give me a second to pause because I can't concentrate because my child is speaking in my ear. One moment. It's parenting 2020, you know what I mean? But here we are. So God chose Moses. And it might be confusing why until we recall his story. And we begin to see some patterns here of the kinds of people, the types of people God chooses to lead liberation. You see, God chose Moses, who was shackled to a past so fraught that when God showed Moses that God knew who he was. Can you imagine this? He's standing there. God showed Moses, I know who you are. And then Moses had to hide his face in fear or even shame. God knew. And when Moses realized that, he was sore afraid. And I can imagine a number of us could relate to this. Maybe we know there's a God who knows and sees everything. Maybe we could be taught that from our earliest days. But it isn't until we have that encounter with God that we truly start to get it. When God stares us in the face and says, not only do I know you and always have, but I know your daddy and your daddy's daddy and your abuelita and your nona and your tias and your primos and your locked up Uncle Bubba too. I know y'all's people and I know all your stories too. I know everything. And just imagine this. Imagine God addressing you directly and saying, I see you, I know you. And then just pause right there for a moment. Because something about this encounter when it happened to Moses was so convincing that Moses had no doubt who was speaking to him. So of course Moses hid his face, as I would have too. It's as if he was like, I mean, you really know everything, God? And we're still talking? You mean you know what I did and you're not locking me up in some jail, taking away my green card, deporting me to somewhere where I have no one? You mean my children get to see me come home tonight? I get to be free? And not just me, but my people too? I love this story. Because when I hear this voice of God at the burning bush, I actually am hearing my grandmothers and my aunties. It's their voices I hear. The ones who gave me my home training, the ones who taught me, you don't sit on their bed in your street clothes or wear your filthy shoes on their clean floors. I hear them telling me, when I call your name and you don't answer what? You say, yes, ma'am. I hear them telling me, it doesn't matter how hungry I think I am at the cookout, I better run to the front of the line and get the elders a heaping platter of the meals first and best. Those are the voices I hear when I learn that Moses had to take off his shoes on the mountaintop. And they're the ones who have experientially taught me that this encounter wasn't about Moses. God saw him and needed to let Moses know that God saw in and through him and beyond him. God saw, and then God called, and then God promised and put him in his place amongst his people. God took Moses from a lowly spot. And for the sake of Moses' people, God made use of him. And it's interesting, as it becomes clear what God is asking of Moses, Moses has his reservations. See, he knows that Pharaoh can't stand him and is after him. Moses represents what it looks like when the oppressed resist the oppression, which makes him Pharaoh's most wanted. And maybe that reminds you of someone, like a refugee who fled a murderous tyrant and spent all of his time uplifting the beauty and humanity of the people, especially criminals, outcasts, prostitutes, and sinners. Jerusalem's most wanted, who stared agents of the carceral state in the face and saw past their little power too. Is that the Jesus they taught you about? Is this the Moses you were taught to follow? See, the wrong teachers, they'll have you walk Moses straight from Pharaoh's dining table to Sinai and skip right over Moses' felony. The wrong teachers, they'll take you straight from Jesus' royal lineage to his ascending to the right hand of the Father and skip right over how much empire pursued, accused, and vilified him so much that the very people he was there to save wanted him dead. They fell for the okie doke. And if you've been paying attention over these past few weeks, I hope that you are catching the theme. When empire hands you a living hero, be suspicious, have questions. But the people God has called were empire's most wanted. The media would have called them dangerous. And where do we fall? Is empire just fine with what we're doing? Then we're probably not going to see a burning bush. Maybe we won't hear God directly because the buzz of empire is just going to ring too loudly in our ears. But my guess is we need to be closer to the edge in order to see the fire in the burning bush. To hear that voice saying, baby, take off them shoes. I got something for you to do. Amen.